Good day, everybody. Welcome to the Bible in a Year 2021. We're on day 102, and this is 1 Samuel chapters 15, 16, and 17. And this is take two for me. So I, I hope you're hearing my voice because it means it works. It worked. Unfortunately, I did the whole video, and it's a bit of a lengthy video today. And went to do the playback and discovered that my mic was not plugged in. Yeah, somebody had been fooling around with my computer. I even have a vocal meter so I can see, and I didn't even look at it. So it's on me, right? So we're going to start off with chapter 15 here, and we got a lot to cover because a lot of stuff happens in these two chapters. We see that Yahweh is calling Saul in to continue where Joshua had left off. It's going to be an expansion, getting rid of certain people, taking over their lands, and we read that in verses 2 and 3. This is what the Lord of Heavenly Forces says: I'm going to punish the Amalekites for what they did to Israel, how they attacked the Israelites as they came up from Egypt. So go, attack the Amalekites, put everything that belongs to them under the ban, spare no one, kill men and women, children and infants, oxen and sheep, camels and donkeys. I know that's hard for us to read. It's hard for us to take in. It is the justice of Yahweh. Um, yeah, so ask Job what that looks like. And so, but it's clear here they're under the ban. Nothing is to survive, right? That's the important thing. Highlight that. Nothing is survive. Nothing. There's no benefit at all to Israel here except that they will get the land. But when we get to it in verse 9, what do we read? Saul and the troops spared Agag. That's the king, along with the best sheep, cattle, fattened calves, lambs, and everything of value. They weren't willing to put them under the ban, but everything that was despised or of no value, they placed under the ban. That's like bringing in offerings that are defective, or the firstborn is perfect, so you actually bring the secondborn because the firstborn is too perfect. You want to hold on to that, so you bring in the one that's diseased or defect. I mean, that's just not going to go, is it? Yeah, we're talking trouble here, and it is trouble because look at the words that Yahweh speaks over Saul in verse 11. I regret making Saul king because he has turned away from following me and hasn't done what I said. Samuel was upset at this, and he prayed to the Lord all night long. Wonder what that prayer was about, because we're all we know is that he's upset. What's he upset about? What exactly is the upset here? But what terrible words they have spoken over you. So what's happened is that Saul was the best that was available in Israel when they called out for a king. So he chose the best, but the best fell short. So he changed his heart. We're told that he changed his heart so that he would have the capacity to grow into being who he needed to be as leader, as the king, obedient to the Lord. But Saul never grew into that. He didn't. He continued with his insecurities. He continued with his immaturity, self-centeredness, and so on. And he knows that he's in trouble here because he lies. And in verse 13, when Samuel reached Saul, Saul greeted him, "The Lord bless you. I have done what the Lord said." He knew he didn't do what the Lord said because they decided not to. They decided not to kill all those things. They decided to keep the best for themselves. He knew. And here we see some insight into Saul. Okay, we get some insight into Saul. We see that he never grew past his insecurities. Samuel said, "Even if you think you are insignificant," he knows that Samuel has a small man mentality. He has a poverty mentality. He doesn't see that he has much worth at all. So he's trying to win over the favor of his army, his guys, by letting them have the best from these things, right? They had already stood up against him, against the thing with Jonathan. He's feeling very insecure about this relationship. So he turns around and yeah, He doesn't do what he's supposed to do for Yahweh, and he honors the army instead. So even if you think you are insignificant, aren't you the leader? Aren't you the leader of Israel's tribes? The Lord anointed you king over Israel. Like, walk in it. Walk in those footsteps. Walk in that. He anointed you. He equipped you to do this. The Lord sent you on a mission, instructing you, go and put the sinful Amalekites under the ban. Fight against them until you've wiped them out. Why didn't you obey the Lord? You had the capacity. You could have done this. You're the anointed leader. You did evil in the Lord's eyes when you tore into the plunder. Yeah, that pretty well sums everything up there, doesn't it? But then, he's trying to get the best of both worlds. And so he comes up with his excuse, which is a lame excuse. Because I want you to understand that the ban, okay, when something is put under the ban, that's already, these things are being sacrificed to Yahweh. It is like a burnt offering, okay? It's just given over to him. They take nothing for themselves, and it's all offered up to the Lord. But look what Saul says. Yes, the troops took sheep and cattle from the plunder, the very best items placed under the ban, but in order to sacrifice them to the Lord, your God, and you notice that your God at Gilgal. Something's been happening here, because suddenly, instead of our God or to the Lord, he's saying your God to your God. So like something has happened here. There's a breakdown that has happened, and this just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It's a double talk thing that's going on, trying to come up with an excuse. But yeah, we see a little revelation here on Yahweh that's good to note, and then we see the rejection. So in verses 22 to 23, does the Lord want entirely burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as obedience to the Lord? What? Like, yeah, he wants the burnt offerings and sacrifices in obedience, because of obedience. You can't set aside obedience and do what you want, offer what you want. You can't do that. You have to walk in that obedience. You have to offer him the best. You have to offer it at this time. Like there are regulations, there's things in place. So like the important thing is you do it in obedience. The ends does not justify the means, ever, with Yahweh. There is a way for it to be done. And obedience is more important than the actual sacrifice. This sacrifice is supposed to be done in obedience to the Lord. Listen to this. Obeying is better than sacrificing. Paying attention is better than fat from rams, because rebellion is as bad as a sin of divination, and divination is pretty bad. Arrogance is like the evil of idolatry. Because you have rejected what the Lord said, he has rejected you as king. So first of all, the dynasty idea was rejected because of what he had done, stepping into the role of a priest, and now because of his outright disobedience in his function as a king. Okay, once he was stepping outside of his function as a king and acting like a priest, and that he received consequences for that. And now, even in his role, there's failure in his role as a king, and so he's about to lose everything. And this is interesting. He confesses here, I have sinned. And he confesses, I have sinned. But there's some confessions that have no root at all. It's just, yeah, I'm supposed to confess. I'm supposed to confess here. I'm supposed to repent here. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to confess. I'll repent. But it's just because it's a form. It's a religious thing. I have sinned, Saul said. But please honor me in front of my people's elders and before Israel, and come back with me so I can worship the Lord your God. Okay, so the question here, why? Okay, is it just because he does love Yahweh, but he just keeps messing up? Or is it because this is a political thing? He needs he needs Samuel to be by his side as he makes his sacrifices, so nobody notices that there's a rift. Nobody knows that there's been a shift, that his people don't turn against him, because they can easily, he's not very secure in his position right now, and they could easily turn against him and just get rid of him. Um, yeah, so is it political or is it relational? And why does Samuel go back? So Samuel went back with Saul, and Saul worshiped the Lord. Is it because of friendship? He spent all night praying. crying out to the Lord? Is it because Saul? Is it because they had this friendship because of their basically they were the two leaders? Um, hmm. And then we get to verse 35, and this kind of seals it for me in the idea that there was a friendship there, and Samuel is mourning the loss of his friend because Yahweh will always come before everybody else in Samuel's life, everybody, and so he's mourning the loss here. Samuel never saw Saul again before he died, but he grieved over Saul. However, the Lord regretted making Saul king over Israel. And then we go to chapter 16, verse 1, and we see here again it's the Lord who chooses, who appoints, who anoints. Okay, it's him. It's not a choosing. He said that with Moses, that he reserves the right to choose who will be king. The people can have a king, the people can ask for a king, but he will choose who will be king over them. And so here he is. He's telling them, get on with it, Samuel. How long are you going to grieve over Saul? I have rejected him as king over Israel. Fill your horn with oil and get going. I'm sending you to Jesse of Bethlehem because I have found my next king among his sons. So yeah, now's the season. Now's the time. There's a heart there that's prepared to walk in obedience to the Lord. That He doesn't have to do anything with because that heart is pure, and for Him. And here, this is supposed to be more revelation. In verse 7, okay, we have more revelation about Yahweh. But the Lord said to Samuel, because Samuel's thinking it's the oldest son, oh, this must be him. And he hasn't heard from the Lord. The Lord didn't say it's him like he did with Saul, as he will with David. He hasn't said anything, but Samuel's about to make assumptions. And the Lord said to him, have no regard for his appearance or stature, because I haven't selected him. God doesn't look at things like humans do. Humans see only what is visible to the eyes, but the Lord sees into the heart. So again, we already know this. We've witnessed it, but now it's being put into words. God will do whatever he wants to do. He will select whomever he decides to select. He will have compassion on whom he has compassion, who he chooses to have compassion on, and he will have mercy on who he chooses to have mercy on. He will choose whatever leader he wants to choose for his reasons. He knows, he understands what those reasons are. So, like, this is, we can't judge. We can't judge by a person's actions or attitudes or anything else. So, look at Samson. I mean, we look at that. We can judge that. We can say, why would he ever pick Samson? Look what a mess he is. But Samson moved the agenda forward. He moved the agenda forward. He was a pain to the Palestinians, and that's what Palestinians. Yeah, that's what he wanted him to be. So he knows each leader has a different purpose and moves the agenda forward. So we need to be careful with that. In verses 12 to 13, we see here the example. He's going to pick the youngest, the smallest, supposedly the weakest. So Jesse sent and brought him in. He was reddish brown, had beautiful eyes, and was good looking. The Lord said, "That's the one. Go anoint him." See there. He pointed it out to Samuel. Samuel has to listen. Doesn't get to choose for himself. Doesn't get to make assumptions. The Lord speaks to him and tells him. So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him right there in front of his brothers. It's not just a little bit of oil. He dumps a whole horn. He bathes him in oil. The Lord's Spirit came over David from that point forward. So he equips him now with knowledge and strength beyond, gives him wisdom, discernment, everything that the Lord wants him to have. But his heart was right to begin with. And now the trick, okay, is to get David into that inner circle. He needs to be there because it's not going to be an overnight thing. There's still things that David needs to go through that the Lord is preparing him for. It takes actually an awful lot of years to get David strength into the place, being able to be the king. So, like with Saul, it was overnight. The Lord's not going to do that again. He puts him through this incubation, this preparation, this school of hard knocks, if you want, to get him to the place to be a good king. David would have been a good king at this time, but he wants him to be absolutely awesome. So look how he arranges things. He touches the heart of a servant who's next to the king. I know that one of Jesse's sons from Bethlehem is a good musician. He's a strong man. Now, get rid of your Sunday school ideas of David as this 12-year-old scrawny kid. He's a strong man and heroic, a warrior who speaks well and is good looking too. The Lord is with him. This is a man of quality, of education, of strength. A heroic it just means that he's self-sacrificing. Like it just he will take the risks. He will lay down his life. Just all of this is how he's describing David to the king. So he gets to get into the inner circle. And so we find this in verse 21. That is how David came to Saul and entered his service. Saul liked David very much, and David became his armor bearer. So and remember, we go back to what was said over Saul, that one of your friends will take your place. One of your friends will become king in your place. And that's amazing when you stop and you think in that prophecy, David wasn't even on the scene yet. Yeah, so this prophecy was concerning somebody who wasn't the king didn't even know yet. So you can imagine what the king was. He's going through all of his friends, and who knows what he did. Keeping people at a distance and the whole thing. And in comes this young guy who wasn't even around during the prophecy. So Saul's not too concerned about him yet. But remember, with his insecurities, and now that the spirit has left him, and there's a tormenting spirit, it's not going to go well. It's not. So now we get to the famous David and Goliath, and here we need to knock down some of the Sunday school lessons and the wrong images that they put in our head and our wrong thinking. And I'll tell you, you're going to have a tough time shaking it out. You do. So right away in verse 4, a champion named Goliath from Gath came out from the Philistine camp. He was more than 9 feet tall. 9 feet. 9 feet isn't 40 feet. Okay. And so often when you're talking to kids about giants, they're thinking of a Disney's portrayal of giants and, Jack and the Beanstalk and all that sort of stuff, the 40-foot tall um, giants. And this is just a big man. He's a big man. He's tall. He's muscular. He's a mighty warrior. He's very strong. Like, yeah, it's something else for a young man who's not old enough to be in the army yet, because that's the problem. Uh, David isn't 12, but he's not old enough to be in the army yet because there's an age requirement. So as much of a warrior as he is, as heroic as he can't serve in the army. But here's a seasoned warrior, Goliath. So get to remember, he's a seasoned warrior, okay? And he's big, but he's not 40 feet tall. And then we see here that David has this double life that he's living, because obviously Jesse allowed him go to the king, but part time, because Jesse wasn't willing to give up the youngest yet, because the youngest was probably the best dealing with the flock. He didn't lose any sheep when David was in charge, right? So we see here in verse 15, David went back and forth from Saul's side to shepherd his father's flock in Bethlehem. So Saul knows him. David acts as his part-time armor bearer. He's also the musician who plays and sings to calm Saul's spirit. So yeah, that's where he is. We also see here that David is obedient to his father, which is really important because if you're not obedient to your father, you're not going to be obedient to Yahweh. Yeah, if you're not obedient to the authorities in your life, don't fool yourself. Yeah, you're going to find every which way not to fulfill all the instructions of the Lord. That's just how it works. If you're obedient to the authorities that are in your life, you will be obedient to Yahweh. Or a better chance of it anyway. So we see here David left his things with an attendant and ran to the front line, because this is what he said: take this food for your brother and the captain. When he arrived, he asked how his brothers were doing, because that was the other thing. His father wanted to report to know what was going on. And so then we see there's a little question here about motivation as far as I'm concerned. David's in the front line. There's this whole thing of Goliath. Like, what's this about? So David asks the soldier standing by him, what will be done for the person who kills the Philistine over there and removes this insult from Israel? Who is that uncircumcised Philistine anyway, that he can get away with insulting the army of the living God? So they inform him about the no taxes for the family, and the one of the daughters is a bride. David just wants to verify this, so he asks another group because he wants to make sure that this is true. So yeah, like he has the motivation because he's concerned about this insulting the army of the Lord, right? But at the same time, there's this, wow, there's an advantage for my dad here. Yeah, maybe he'll let me join the army if I can get it, no taxes for him, type of idea. Now, I don't know if I'm just, again, that's just me looking at this and seeing David as a real person, just wondering what the motivations are. Why is he asking? Why is this so important that he's asking what the reward would be? Um, and then David's brother, we see this is as far as I'm concerned, this is a Joseph situation. Yeah, look, when David's oldest brother, Eliab, heard him talking to the soldiers, he got very mad at David. Why did you come down here? He said. Who is watching those few sheep for you in the wilderness? I know how arrogant you are. See, the thing is, when you know who you are, when you're confident in yourself, it can come across as arrogant. Your boldness in who you are can come across as arrogant. We need to be aware of that when we are bold in who we are as the children of God, because that can come across as arrogant, and we don't want to come across as arrogant. So sometimes we might need to tone down the boldness just a bit, so that we can still have relationship with people. And so he's coming across as arrogant to Eliab in the same way that Joseph came across as arrogant to his brothers, but really didn't mean anything by it. He says, I know how arrogant you are and your devious plan. Sees them as being devious. You came down just to see the battle. And and I'm wondering how much trouble David caused among his brothers, because he says, look at this. I hear this so many times. Having a large family. What did I do wrong this time? What? I'm innocent here. I didn't do anything wrong this time. David replied, it was just a question. Um, so yeah, I'm sure that Joseph didn't see that he was the cause of any problems either. And we see that David volunteered here. He stepped forward, and he says in verse 32, don't let anyone lose courage because of this Philistine. David told Saul, I, your servant, will go and fight him. Now the question is, how desperate is this king? How desperate is Saul? Because remember, there's a stipulation here in the challenge from Goliath. If the Israeli soldier loses, they will have to submit to the Philistines. They will serve the Philistines. And it's reverse. If Goliath loses, then the Philistines will have to serve the Israelis. So there's a lot riding on this. And Saul, like, how desperate is he? He just turns around and he places this on David, a non-seasoned soldier. Like, yeah, the whole future of Israel is riding on this guy who's not old enough to be in the army, but nobody else is coming forward. He's put out the reward out there, and nobody else, none of the seasoned warriors are willing to come forward. So there's something to say about the boldness of knowing who you are and who Yahweh is, and convincing the king here. David reveals, he's got very specific fighting skills here. Your servant, in verse 34 to 36, your servant has kept his father's sheep. David replied to Saul, and if ever a lion or bear came and carried off one of the flock, I would go after it, strike it, and rescue the animal from its mouth. If it turned on me, I would grab it at its jaw, strike it, and kill it. Your servant has fought both lions and bears. This uncircumcised Philistine will be just like one of them because he has insulted the army of the living God. So, yeah, David is already, what's he doing? He's stepping into the role of the shepherd. He's stepping into protecting the flock that belongs to Yahweh. Just stop and think. Like, that's really striking me just right now at this moment. David is stepping in as the shepherd of God's flock. Goliath has come out as a bear or a lion and is threatening Yahweh's flock. And as the shepherd, he's going to come in and he's going to take care of this brute beast. That is something else, people. Write that down. Okay, so here again, we're going to dispel one of the Sunday school pictures that you often see of a young 12-year-old boy trying to walk around in a man's armor. Get rid of that. Please just burn that image. Here, look what we read. David strapped his sword on over the armor. David has a sword. David strapped his sword on over the armor, but he couldn't walk around well because he was 12 years old and scrawny and it didn't fit. No, because he'd never tried it before. David wasn't part of the army. He wasn't old enough. But we already heard that he was strong and he was heroic and he was a warrior. That's how he was described before. So it's not a matter it didn't fit. It was a matter of it didn't fit him in his purpose because he wasn't trained in this armor. He'd never tried it before. So he took them off. He then grabbed what his armor is. The Lord is his armor. He grabbed now his tools. He grabbed his staff and chose 5 smooth stones from the stream bed. He put them in the pocket of his shepherd's bag, and with a sling in hand went out to the Philistine. Yeah, he took his tools with him. He would strike with his staff, and from a distance, what he would do with a wild animal is he'd use a sling. He'd knock the animal out with his sling, and then he would with his staff he'd use it as a club, and he would basically beat the thing unconscious until it was dead. So he used the tools that were familiar with him, or familiar to him, that he was familiar with. Okay. And then, and then, you know, what is important about the story? What do we need to take away? Other than the fact that David is already walking in a kingly role here as the shepherd over the people, what else can we take away from the story? Look at this, verses 45 to 47. But David told the Philistine, "You are coming against me with sword, spear, and scimitar, but I come against you. I come against you. My tool, my weapon, my armor, I come against you in the name of the Lord of heavenly forces, the God of Israel's army, the one you've insulted. Today, the Lord will hand you over to me. The Lord will hand you over to me. I will strike you down and cut off your head. Today, I will feed your dead body and the dead bodies of the entire Philistine camp to the wild birds and the wild animals. Then the whole world will know that there is a God on Israel's side, and all those gathered here will know that the Lord doesn't save by means of sword and spear. The Lord owns this war, and he will hand all of you over to us." Wow. Can you see why that boldness doesn't fit into his father's house? David is too big for his father's house. David is his boldness as big as a nation. That he's standing there as a king. His boldness is as big as a nation. That's the boldness that has been given to him. And he knows this battle is the Lord's. The Lord has given this brute beast, and that's how he's going to treat him, this brute beast, into his hands, just like he gave the bears and the lions over him. Wow, that is powerful stuff. So what's important here is David's faith, David's trust, David's obedience, David stepping into the shoes of a king. And is there, I mean, what an amazing transformation must be happening here, because he's unrecognizable. He's unrecognizable to the king. He's the king's part-time, you know, armor bearer. He's the king's musician. He's the king's singer. And yet, look what we find. Now, when Saul saw David go out to meet the Philistine, it must have been in the anointing of the Lord. He asked Abner, the army general, Abner, whose son is that boy? As surely as you live, your majesty, I don't know. Abner answered. Then find out whose son that young man is. The king replied, like, yeah, yeah, I want to know, is this going to be like, you can see him right now sizing it up, can't you? Because he's walking out. He's got a stately presence. He's got the aura of a king all about him. And Saul wants to know whether this is a threat to him or not. Doesn't say that here, but I think that's the concern that I'm hearing in Saul there. So yeah, glad I got to the end of this. Um, there's a lot there to unpack, guys. There's a lot there to meditate on. There's a lot of practical application that we have in this that you need to come away with and really consider this in this relationship, in the place where we serve, because we walk as kings and queens of the kingdom of God. And do we know who we are? Do we know who we are? Do we know who our king is? Do we know who we are? And are we walking in that boldness? Do we have boldness for nations? Is our boldness too great even for where we are at this time? Is there promotion? Is there graduation coming up? Good questions. Thanks for joining me today. You guys be blessed in all of this. Be blessed, guys. Really be blessed. And thank you for being on this journey with me. And we'll see you tomorrow.